The devastating natural disaster that occurred in northeastern Japan on March 11, 2011, began with a powerful offshore earthquake in the northeastern region of Honshu, the main island of Japan. It caused widespread damage on land and triggered multiple major aftershocks. The resulting tsunami devastated many coastal areas of the country, especially in the Tohoku region, northeastern Honshu. The tsunami also led to a major nuclear accident at a power plant located on the coast. Initial reports on casualties following the tsunami indicated several hundred deaths and many more missing. The number of confirmed deaths and missing persons increased significantly in the days that followed, as the extent of the damage became clearer, particularly in coastal areas, and rescue operations began. Within 2 weeks after the disaster, Japan's official death toll exceeded 10,000. More than 1.5 times that number remained missing and were presumed dead, while search efforts continued. The official number of dead or missing eventually rose to approximately 28,500. However, as more survivors were found, the figure began to decline. By the end of 2011, the number had dropped to around 19,300. Ultimately, the officially confirmed number of dead or missing from this disaster settled at approximately 18,500, although other estimates place the total at a minimum of 20,000. In the months following the tsunami, many people reported supernatural encounters, particularly with ghosts searching for a way home after the disaster. They were convinced that these encounters were real. Not long after the devastating tsunami in Japan in 2011, many lives had ended, many had suffered great loss, and many more had to move on. Yoji Tanaka was an ordinary taxi driver in Ishinomaki City, Miyagi Prefecture. He wasn't talkative, but was hard-working. He never complained, not even on days when there were barely any passengers. Many times as he drove past the ruins of what used to be neighborhoods, families, and memories, he would quietly sigh and keep driving. That night, around 10 p.m., the air was cold, and the area around the train station was eerily silent. While Yoji was waiting in his taxi, a young woman quietly approached. She was wearing a modest beige office outfit like any regular office worker. Her long hair was damp, as if she had just been caught in the rain. "Could you take me to the other side of town?" she said in a calm voice. Yoji froze. The other side of town was the area that had been completely wiped out by the tsunami. Hardly anyone lived there anymore. The land had not been restored, and some roads were still broken in places. "There's no one living there now. Why do you want to go?" The woman didn't answer. She simply nodded slightly. "But I have to go." Yoji looked into her eyes. They were empty, yet filled with something he couldn't explain. He nodded slowly and began to drive. No one said anything throughout the journey. As he drove for a while, he began to hear the sound of water droplets lightly hitting the car floor behind him. But he didn't have the courage to turn around and check where the sound was coming from, fearing it might make the passenger uncomfortable. All he could do was occasionally glance at her through the rearview mirror. Besides her damp hair, Yoji noticed something else. Her face was extremely pale, almost ghostly white. Even without direct lighting in the car, he could clearly see her pale complexion. Every time he looked into the rearview mirror, she was always sitting with her head down, never looking outside like most passengers would when finding their destination. The farther he drove, the more eerie the surroundings became. From houses on both sides of the road, he began to see ruins and debris, The streetlights that had been illuminating the path started disappearing one by one until finally only the headlights of his car lit the road ahead. Rain began to fall lightly, and the misted windows blurred his visibility. Yoji had to focus intently on the road. In the midst of the silence, he felt the air inside the car growing unnaturally cold. After driving for a while, he stopped the car beside what used to be an elementary school. Now it was nothing more than a place filled with rubble and remnants of a building barely recognizable as anything that once existed, except for a rotting wooden sign villagers had placed there as a memorial. "I think this is as far as I can take you, miss," Yoji said, squinting at the road ahead, trying to figure out where exactly her destination might be. Silence. "Miss," he called out again, in case she hadn't heard him. Still silent. Yoji glanced at the rearview mirror. Empty. He decided to turn his body around to look at the back seat, thinking she might be bending down to pick something up. But what he saw made his hair stand on end from head to toe. There was no one there. Not even a trace of water where he was certain he'd been hearing dripping sounds throughout the drive. He felt as though his heart had stopped for a moment. He looked around and saw only ruins of buildings, homes, and cars scattered across the area. There were no signs of life whatsoever. Yoji sat there for a while, trying to compose himself, before finally starting the engine and driving home as quickly as he could. He stopped driving his taxi for several days. When he finally returned to work, he told his colleagues the whole story, his voice serious. One of them looked at him and murmured, "So you're one of the ones who saw her too, huh?" Another driver saw that same woman near the station last month. Yoji stayed silent. He didn't respond. He simply looked out the window and saw the rain falling softly, just like that night. Maybe it wasn't that she simply wanted to go, but maybe she had never made it back home since that day. Tagajo City, Miyagi Prefecture, Spring 2012. 1 year had passed since the massive tsunami that forever changed the land of Japan. Many houses remained in ruins. Silence and sorrow still lingered throughout the city. At a small fire station in the suburban area of Tagajo, a young firefighter named Hayato had just recently started working. He was aware of the heavy responsibility in a land filled with scars, both from the disaster and from the hearts of the people. One night in early April, while everyone was resting in the office, the emergency phone suddenly rang. "Fire, Naoka District 3-2, please hurry." The voice on the line was soft and trembling, but clear enough that no one dared to ignore it. Hayato and his team rushed immediately to the reported location, but when they arrived, there was nothing. Only an abandoned area overgrown with weeds and debris from buildings that had been swallowed by the waves the year before. The fire crew drove around the area, hoping the caller might have reported the wrong coordinates. But they found no sign of any fire nearby. It might have been a misunderstanding, or perhaps a prank call by a child. They tried to think positively and drove back to the station. But the next night, and for many nights after that, the phone kept ringing at the same time, with the same words and the same location. Only the voices changed. Sometimes it was a middle-aged man, sometimes a woman, and even at times the innocent voice of a child. "Fire! Naoka District 3-2, please hurry." There was no caller ID, no name, and every time they arrived at the scene, there was nothing. Not even the slightest trace of a fire or of anyone having been there. Hayato grew uneasy. He decided to speak with the senior fire captain, Uncle Hiroshi, who had been working there since before the tsunami. Uncle Hiroshi fell silent for a moment before speaking in a serious tone. that spot? There used to be a family living there before the waves swept the house away. Father, mother, 2 children. None of them survived. They were caught in a gas explosion before the water even reached them. It happened less than an hour before the tsunami struck. Hayato felt a chill run through his entire body. Then, why are they calling just now? Perhaps their spirits still don't realize they've passed on, and they're still calling for help. The next night, Hayato and his team prepared incense sticks, candles, and flowers. When the phone rang again, they drove to the same location, stood in front of the scarred land, and recited prayers, wishing for the souls to find peace. The night breeze blew gently. The shadows of the wild grass swayed as if waving farewell. After that night, there were no more mysterious calls. The small house in the suburbs was quieter than it had ever been. After the giant wave swept through in March, many lives were changed forever, including the family of Yuko and Shota, who had lost their only son, Kohei, an 11-year-old boy full of joy and a love for all kinds of toys. After the funeral, everything that belonged to their son remained in its place. The battle robot he loved to play with alongside his father, the remote-controlled car he used to drive in circles around his mother, and the talking Shiba Inu plush that had been his favorite birthday gift when he turned 11. Everything was still cleaned and kept just as it was, but lifeless. The first night something happened. It was a drizzly night with a strong, cold wind. Yuko jolted awake when she heard a soft knocking at the front door. Knock, knock, knock. She looked through the peephole but saw no one. When she opened the door, she saw only small, wet footprints on the ground, as if a child had walked there in the rain, but there was no trace of anyone. She thought it might have been a local child who had knocked on the wrong house. Although it felt a bit strange for a child to be out this late at night, she didn't think much of it. The next night, and many nights after that, the same thing happened. The knocking, the wet footprints, even on nights when it didn't rain. She told her husband and began to suspect that it might be Kohei, but he thought it was just a mother's grief playing tricks on her mind. But Yuko became increasingly certain. This wasn't just a sound. A few days later, as Yuko sat alone in the living room at night, Kohei's toy on the shelf suddenly activated. "Woof woof, Kohei, let's play," said the talking Shiba Inu plush, without anyone touching it. The next day, the toy car that had been sitting in the corner of the living room suddenly started driving in circles on its own, even though the remote control was still resting on the table. Yuko cried and whispered into the silence, "Is it you, Kohei? Have you come back to see Mommy?" One late night, she decided to tell Shota everything again and insisted. This was definitely Kohei. His face turned pale, and he tried to tell her that their son had already moved on to a place where they could no longer meet. Kohei would never return. As they were arguing, the battle robot, without batteries, sitting on the shelf, started to make sounds. Shota stared at what was happening in shock. He collapsed to the floor, emotionally overwhelmed. The two of them hugged each other and cried, without saying another word. From that night on, Yuko prepared snacks and placed them in front of her son's bedroom. She left a warm orange light on and waited. The knocking still came, the toys still activated by themselves, and on some nights she could hear tiny footsteps running past her bedroom door, or soft laughter that sounded just like Kohei when he was alive. Until one night, while she was half asleep, she heard the familiar knocking once again. Knock, 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 and then, just a second later, a faint whisper by her ear. "Mom, I'm home." The next morning, she told a monk from a nearby temple about everything. The monk gently nodded and said, "Some children don't realize they've passed away. They think they've just come home as usual, waiting for their parents to take them to school like every day. So the monk performed a prayer and ritual to help Kohei's spirit realize that it was time to move on. After the ceremony, everything returned to silence. The knocking stopped, the toys no longer moved, but on some nights Yuko still sat there, quietly looking into her son's room, and sometimes the Shiba Inu plush would suddenly turn on and say, "Woof, Mom." And now, we've reached the end of this episode. Do you believe that in places where great tragedy strikes, where screams echo and lives are lost in terror, some souls never leave? Do you believe they're still wandering, still trying to go home? Some don't even realize they've already died. Subscribe for more chilling stories, folk tales, and urban legends from around the world.